Some people may join us as we get rolling, but I want to welcome everyone to the second ACE webinar of the year. My name is Brian Jennings. I'm the Executive Vice President for the American Coalition for Ethanol. I'll be joined on the webinar by our eyes and ears in Washington, D.C., our lobbyist, Jonathan Lehman. We've also got our Senior Director of Operations and Programming, Shannon Gustafson, on standby for any technical errors I make to step into the rescue. We appreciate that everyone is joining us today. Before we get rolling and before I turn it over to Jonathan, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, if you didn't know this already, that today marks the 73rd anniversary of D-Day. And so if you haven't done so, just take some time today to reflect upon the sacrifices the greatest generation made for us during World War II. And, sometimes if you think you're having a tough or a rough day, imagine what it would be like to be landing on the beach somewhere, parachuting under fire during the war. So I want to honor and respect the sacrifice that so many made, so we can enjoy the life that we have. During today's webinar, we're going to do 3 or 4 things. First of all, we're going to very briefly kind of cover the first 100 days of the Trump presidency and the 115th Congress, what got done, what remains to get done. We will pivot to what's coming down the pike, both from a high-profile level and also from an ethanol industry standpoint, some of the priorities that we want to address. We will then switch gears and talk a little bit about what you can expect at the ACE conference this year in August, the 15th, 16th, and 17th of August in Omaha, and we hope you all can make it to that, and then we'll go to your questions at the very end. We want you to submit your questions in writing. I should note that right now. I think there's a way for you to type in a question through the webinar, and then Shannon will make sure that she gets the questions forwarded to us. So please type your questions in when you have them. For now, everybody, I think, is going to be on a listen-only mode. All the lines are going to be muted, so just wanted you to know that. So, we have the first 100 days of the Trump presidency in the rearview mirror. We've got Congress sort of embarking on their summer work period, where you have sort of two sort of sprints that Congress has. There's a 4-week stretch here in June where they hope to accomplish a lot. They'll take about a week-long break around Independence Day, and then there will be another sort of 3-week sprint in July prior to the August recess. There's a tremendous amount of activity that typically Congress wants to have happen during that time, and certainly a new president. We have some hot topic priorities that we hope are addressed in this time frame, and so we're going to highlight sort of what we can expect in the coming days from that standpoint. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for some insight and analysis to Jonathan Lehman.
Great, thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it. So I thought we'd just kind of take a step back and look at the first 100 days and kind of what that means kind of for the substance, but also kind of what kind of tees up to Brian's point for the summer and kind of how things get intertwined and interlaced and kind of all tied together. So if you look at kind of the tenor and the tactic of President Trump's effort in the first 100 days, it was really kind of focused on what he could do administratively, kind of a lot of proclamations or executive orders, a lot of kind of addressing, kind of items via the agencies, kind of 2 high-profile things that he's worked on in Congress was he was able to get a Supreme Court nominee through. That was done via kind of changing the Senate rules and kind of allowing that to pass with a simple majority vote versus kind of a 60-vote point of order. I think we kind of saw that drag and kind of distract Congress for the Senate, especially for kind of a couple months as that moved forward. My guess is, we're hearing rumblings that Justice Kennedy may be interested in stepping down, and the potential for another Supreme Court fight looming in either the near future or within kind of the next year and a half, which I think will kind of further increase the stakes. For President Trump putting kind of two of his folks on and kind of changing the balance of power on the Supreme Court, kind of highlighting the interest groups on that point. On the Obamacare repeal, as you've all seen, the House has kind of passed their version finally, and kind of by the skin of their nose, kind of got it through. It's got real problems in the Senate. The CBO score that came out and said there'd be 23 million in additional uninsured people under the House version of the bill. Kind of the high cost of kind of premiums for those with pre-existing conditions, et cetera, really making it hard for the Republican conference in the Senate to come to any resolution on legislation. And I think they continue to have, kind of ongoing meetings and, kind of on that front, but not yet in a place where they have any type of agreement. I think the thing we'll have to kind of watch on that piece is, if they do get to some level of an agreement in the Senate, can that version or be passed in the House, or can there be something that reconcile that can pass either? So I think there's a long slog of kind of work on kind of healthcare and repeal of Obamacare before any actual kind of effort or action is done in that point. On immigration, I think the large kind of component from Trump has been kind of this battle on his travel bans, and he kind of, as you saw probably in the news, re-upped the rhetoric on that after the kind of the bombings in London over the last week and a half. He's asking the Supreme Court to review it and kind of doubling down on kind of that piece. So we'll kind of continue to monitor. The other nugget, when they passed the omnibus legislation, he did not get as much money for building the wall that he would have liked. The Republicans and the Democrats didn't give him kind of the dollars that he was looking for on the wall. So he's really kind of been focused on having to bring home something on this executive order to show movement on immigration. I think on trade, we've seen him kind of work towards his, kind of promises and rhetoric from the campaign, and really trying to kind of target, kind of that populist wing of the Republican, kind of party, kind of especially down kind of the middle of the country and rural areas. He's talked specifically about, kind of looking at NAFTA and trying to renegotiate that. He's come after Germany from an auto industry, kind of component quite directly. And as we just saw last week, he, undid the, kind of Paris climate agreement. We'll talk a little bit about that kind of moving forward. I think on energy, kind of the big, kind of point besides Paris and kind of withdrawing from that is he's, kind of green-lighted kind of the pipelines for the oil sector to be built, which is kind of a reversal from the Obama administration, and kind of giving, kind of a significant benefit to the oil industry, but also, trying to talk about it from an infrastructure and a jobs perspective. So, a lot of kind of the work that's been kind of focused on 100 days, as I said, is, kind of been on the administrative side. The legislative side is, kind of relatively stalled, but for this Supreme Court. So I think as we look at kind of where a lot of our battle is going to be held here in the near term, it's at EPA. And as you all know, we got the RVO, we have kind of their use of the waiver authority that's in litigation, we have the RVP issue that we want, we have kind of issues with regard to the carbon accounting for corn ethanol that we'd like to see. And I think the first, kind of nugget, and you look at kind of the exit of the Paris Climate Accord and kind of the role that Administrator Pruitt had in that, it really kind of highlights the kind of the strong kind of connection he has with Trump and the ability to be in Trump's ear on doing these things. So you had Pruitt and you had Bannon, who were let's exit the Paris Climate Accord. You had Trump overseas, all these world, kind of leaders, kind of urging him not to leave it. You had his National Economic Council and his Treasury Department, kind of recommending to him that he not pull out of the climate accord. And you had his daughter Ivanka, kind of pushing really hard not to exit the climate accord. And Pruitt and Bannon won. And if you saw the kind of the press conference, Pruitt was there, and he kind of continues to have kind of a very public persona on this issue, and kind of really refusing to kind of dive into whether Trump believes in kind of climate change or not, and kind of addressing that concern. So I highlight that kind of in point, that we really have to be paying attention to Pruitt and kind of the small cadre of staff that he brought with him, because he is, I'd say, gaining power within kind of the Trump kind of universe. And you look at the next two bullets, you kind of can see why, as Trump looks at what he's been able to accomplish. He's written executive orders, and he's kind of directed the various agencies to look at what they can do to, kind of undo Obama, kind of rulemakings that can be talked about from streamlining government. And they're revisiting the Clean Power Plan, and Pruitt is kind of point on that, and, kind of they're working to repeal the Waters of the U.S. rule, Pruitt being, kind of point on that. So he's got, kind of significant major, kind of topic areas that are in his wheelhouse, that are important to the Trump administration. I think the other just nugget to talk about there for him is, he's the former AG from Oklahoma. Things that we're hearing is that he, being EPA administrator is not what he envisions being his final job in public service. And, there's speculation that he's eyeing a potential run for the Senate in Oklahoma if Inhofe decides to retire. And you can see him kind of wrapping himself with a bunch of former Inhofe staffers who are on the EPW committee, kind of in senior jobs within EPA. And I point that out, one, because all of those folks have never been our friends and have been working on the side of oil for a long time. And two, if he really does want to run for the Senate seat in Oklahoma, he is going to be balancing a different set of political dynamics than the president. And not wanting to be seen as upsetting the apple cart with the oil industry. So as he gains power, or has gained power, as we look at kind of the people he's surrounding him with, and we look at kind of what his potential political future entails, we're just going to have to be extra diligent with what happens at EPA. I think from the other, kind of key officials, the thing I'll highlight is, our best friend, I think, Terry Branstad is, kind of over in China, and it's good to have him, kind of in the administration and having the ability to kind of talk to the president. Sonny Perdue, I think, will be critically important, especially as we look at the farm economy, and the farm economy, and kind of what prices are doing and impact in rural America. I think I'm encouraged. I think kind of a number of kind of members are encouraged by his pro-ethanol comments when he was out in Iowa recently. And I think it's kind of building the linkage of kind of the importance of biofuels with commodity prices, and him overseeing that department. That hopefully we'll find an unconventional ally from a southerner on our behalf in biofuels moving ahead.
I just wanted to highlight for you the fly-in. Many of you were there. It was our second largest fly-in that we've had in the last 8-9 years. I think this was our 9th one. More than 70 ACE members from 16 or 17 different states did well over 120 Hill meetings. We focused on the RFS, reed vapor pressure legislation, and octane in terms of issues. In terms of messaging, Jonathan mentioned the plight of the farm economy earlier. We were certainly trying to make the case that increasing the use of renewable fuels is one of the most effective ways to address some of the concerns in the farm economy. We talked about, from a messaging standpoint, how regulations are standing in the way of small businesses like retailers who want to sell higher blends of ethanol as one of the ways to promote RVP relief. Clearly, we talked about the RFS and don't mess with the RFS type posture. I will say that after the fly-in, I know we picked up at least 15 co-sponsors of RVP legislation, which Jonathan and I will talk about in a little more detail briefly. So we were very happy with the that progress from the fly-in.
So I think as we kind of look at what's coming up in the next kind of work period, a lot of these things are interrelated and are kind of full of a minefield, kind of moving ahead. So kind of probably one of the most important kind of issues that is outstanding right now is the debt ceiling. Right now it's set at about $19.8 trillion. We're going to hit that soon. In fact, the Treasury Department's having to use special measures to kind of do some fancy bookkeeping for us to continue to be able to borrow and kind of pay our obligations right now. So we'll be in a spot of having to get, kind of the House and the Senate to agree to, kind of raising the debt ceiling soon, probably, in this next work period and definitely before the August recess. There's a couple different ways to do that. The first is trying to get to a budget resolution that the House and the Senate can agree on that includes, kind of a increase in the debt ceiling. You look at it kind of where the president came out with his budget and how it landed with a thud, not just with Democrats, but with Republicans in the House and the Senate. I think the likelihood of getting to kind of a budget that the Senate and the House can agree on is pretty shaky. Kind of moving forward into kind of this year, and if you don't kind of get kind of a finalized budget resolution with the reconciliation instructions passed, it's going to mean that debt ceiling is going to need 60 votes to, 60 votes to, kind of pass in the Senate. It's going to need, all the kind of Freedom Caucus fiscal conservatives in the House to be, kind of supportive with it. And there's significant potential that we could see, kind of a brinksmanship here on this, kind of coming up in the next month. The other, kind of piece that's kind of how all these issues are related is that in order to kind of get the tax package that the president wants from a reform, they've been looking at savings coming out of the kind of repeal of the Obamacare legislation, and they're looking at kind of reconciliation instructions, for other savings that would allow tax reform to pass with 51 votes. If you don't get a budget kind of resolution enacted, and if you don't get health care repeal enacted into law, you don't have those savings, and it makes tax reform much more difficult, especially when you look at disagreement within the Republican conference and the Trump administration. President Trump comes at kind of issues of infrastructure and other components being very comfortable with debt, kind of coming from the real estate world and kind of borrowing money to make money. And you look at kind of his plan on taxes, you look at his plan on kind of infrastructure, and kind of the trillions of dollars he wants to spend there. He's not afraid of borrowing money to do those things. And he's got, the Freedom Caucus members in the House especially who want a balanced budget. So trying to find, kind of ways that, you can get to tax reform and infrastructure if you don't have a budget resolution and you don't have some level of, kind of space within the debt ceiling, makes all of those issues extremely complicated and a pitfall kind of coming forward. On kind of the appropriations bills, committees and the subcommittees on appropriations are kind of working through, kind of the requests and, kind of hearings. The budget complicates that too, because the budget's what sets the top line numbers for how much is going to be spent in energy and water, how much is going to be spent on the ag bill, et cetera. and the committees break down those dollars amongst the accounts. If they don't have those overall numbers, it makes it very hard to do the individual bills and probably pushes us back into some level of a continuing resolution for spending or some level of an omnibus. I think the bright spot, if we see, kind of things moving forward, is, kind of Farm Bill. We're kind of have started hearings both in the Senate side and the House side. And I think there's motivation in a bipartisan manner amongst the committee members to make significant progress this year, and hopefully not get to a spot of running up against, kind of the expiration of the bill next year and trying to write a reauthorization. I think, kind of given where we are with the farm economy and, kind of prices, I think it increases motivation amongst both Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the aisle to work towards finding a resolution on the Farm Bill. I think as, I sit here and kind of look at the various agenda items, that's the piece, kind of the piece of legislation that has the most likely success of some bipartisan movement in the positive direction. I think the next part, we can kind of turn to the next slide, is just the cabinet nominations. And, I think we're sitting here in June. The president was kind of inaugurated in January. We've basically have 440 Senate confirmed jobs that do not yet have anybody that the president is interested in putting into place. We have 117 that that kind of fit into the realm of either being kind of identified to be nominated, waiting confirmation in the Senate, and we've had 39 that are confirmed. So what that tells you is that we really don't have a lot of people in these agencies to work with, and it's kind of continuing to be kind of triage from the top kind of level, kind of the administrator, secretary level, and kind of the political staff they have brought in to help them. And, the bureaucratic line staff folks are just kind of sitting there waiting instruction and direction. So, I think if you look at what the president has done via executive order and kind of directing the agencies, that's about all that they're going to be in the spot of accomplishing until these nominees move through. And, you kind of look at kind of the comparison as to where we were after the first 100 days for the various, kind of past administrations, and kind of where, how many nominations Obama had kind of pending versus confirmed. You look at Trump, he's lagging behind kind of significantly where we've been in the past. So, that'll be the other area that's going to take a lot of time once he starts nominating people for vetting and hearings within the committees, and it's going to take, time on the Senate floor to kind of pass those through, which will also kind of clog up, kind of the legislative action. If you look at, I think the place that we kind of see the prime focus right now, kind of in this next work period, is in the Senate EPW committee. I'm sure you are all aware that Senator Grassley and Senator Thune really worked to leverage some kind of must-pass, kind of Congressional Review Act votes in repealing some, kind of final, kind of efforts of Obama, and they wanted a commitment to include kind of the RVP in the omnibus that passed. They weren't able to kind of secure that from their Republican friends, and what they got as a consolation prize was the agreement to bring up, kind of an RVP issue with a hearing in the Senate EPW committee, and then potentially a vote. I think as we've talked about in the past, the EPW committee isn't our best friends, and it's worse than it was, kind of last Congress. Senator Barrasso, as chair, is, kind of a strong opponent of the RFS and biofuels, has called for it to be repealed. Senator Carper disdains corn ethanol. He's interested in helping his chicken industry in Delaware. So you have kind of the leadership on both Republican and Democratic side not in our, kind of not in our favor. We're looking at a hearing on the RVP kind of in the June timeframe, and then it's unclear about timing on a markup. I think if you turn to the next slide, right now, if you look at kind of a vote on RVP, I don't think we have the votes. And these 5 members are the key to kind of helping us secure the votes in committee. Barrasso has promised soon that he wouldn't offer an amendment, an RFS amendment, but he has not promised that he won't allow others to offer an amendment. So you could see an Inhofe, you could see a Wicker, even somebody on the Senate side, kind of a Carper or a Cardin, kind of offering, kind of poison pill amendments. You could also see the oil industry kind of offering, kind of amendments that, make it less likely for Democrats to be able to kind of swallow hard and, kind of vote to, pass out a piece of legislation. What we've heard is, well, the Republicans think they have about 3 votes, and the rest are going to have to come from the Democrats. And I think our message, especially to Fisher and Ernst and Rounds, and to a certain extent Moran, is it's not just your vote that you're responsible for. Your job is to convince the majority of the Republicans to vote with you in getting this legislation passed. That this was, kind of should have been a procedural effort to kind of get this out of committee so it could be stuck on a must-pass piece of legislation. And the same for Duckworth with, kind of working to help secure our advanced cellulosic Democrats from an RVP perspective. So I think as we kind of look at it today, it's, kind of those 5 need to be significantly motivated to go and secure the other votes on the EPW committee, and doing it in a way that doesn't create poison pills that upset kind of our, kind of firewall on undoing the RFS from 40 votes. So I sit here, it's like this isn't kind of an easy slam dunk. It's kind of filled with pitfalls, and the deal was kind of agreed to without knowing what the outcome was going to be. So we're all just going to have to continue to be vigilant and make sure these friends know that they're responsible for getting us to the majority.
And I would just add to that if you are from Nebraska or Iowa or Kansas or South Dakota or Illinois, it is critically important for you to be in contact with these senators. A phone call to them is probably the best. Actually, a face-to-face meeting would be the best. If they're going to be home over the weekend, that'd be the best way to interact with them, followed by a phone call. A letter to them would also be very important. I think that if the legislative markup does go forward sometime potentially in July, following a hearing that we expect to have happen here potentially soon in June, the legislation has to be clean. Those poison pill amendments that Jonathan referred to could really hamper our chances of getting something done. And so I think the message to these senators is A, thank you for co-sponsoring or sponsoring this legislation. B, we need your help. As Jonathan indicated, to go find more votes. We need 11 votes in the EPW committee. So these folks got to find at least 6 other senators to join them to support this. And we need it to be clean. We need this to be free of poison pills and things like that. I don't have to tell you, I'm sure you all know that the low RVP season started last week. So this June 1 to September 15 period we're in becomes a hassle for retailers in the vast majority of the country. The gray part of this map, the conventional gasoline areas, where under the rules the way they are today, retailers in conventional gasoline areas need to either pull E15 or relabel their pumps to indicate E15 as a flex fuel. And that's a problem for a lot of retailers, and you know that because you've heard that from retailers. And so that's why it's really important that they are part of our lobbying effort, and they've long been part of how we have sort of conveyed this issue to Congress and the administration. You've seen this before. This is Charlie Good, a retailer from Iowa, who ACE is featured in paid advertising we've done in Washington to make the case that reed vapor pressure needs to be fixed some way, shape, or form. But it's not just single store owners like Charlie. A lot of large independent chains who have made the switch or are in the process of making the switch to E15 have joined us on this effort, and so that's been tremendously helpful. This is certainly not an exhaustive sampling of the retailers that are making the move to E15, but it highlights some of the leading retailers who are doing that, whether it's a Jets in the Milwaukee area, or a Thornton's in the Chicago area, or certainly some, if you're from a place like I am, sort of in the more traditional Corn Belt, the Casey's and the Come and Go's and the Quick Trips are more familiar to you. Sheetz has been tremendously helpful on this effort. Their fuels people have joined ACE in our fly-ins, and they're located sort of on the eastern seaboard, so that's nice geographic balance in terms of some of the progress we see being made with E15. It's expected we could get to about 1,000 locations or more by the end of the year. So progress is being made, but the RVP stumbling block is certainly an excuse that many retailers are legitimately using for why they don't offer this fuel. And so we absolutely need to get reed vapor pressure fixed. The legislation that Jonathan referred to, which is sponsored by Fisher and Grassley, Donnelly of Indiana, many others, it simply adds 2 words to the statute. It clarifies that 10% or more ethanol would qualify for the RVP waiver. So this isn't, we're not rewriting, paragraphs of statute here. We're really just clarifying or perfecting the statute to give a little more direction to EPA. And speaking of EPA, we continue to pursue sort of a double barrel approach to fixing this problem. Right now, there seems to be some momentum behind legislation, and so we're putting our shoulder behind that, and we're asking you to do that as well. But we also have always felt like EPA has the authority they need to address this, and fixing RVP certainly fits within the regulatory reform agenda that President Trump brings to the table. And so we continue to pursue the EPA fix as well.
So I think, besides RVP, one of the things that we're looking at being kind of completed by EPA soon is the 2018 proposed rulemaking. We're hearing that it, kind of could come out this week for public comment. They desperately want to hit the November deadline this year after kind of, missing it several times in a row. Kind of from a number perspective, we're hearing kind of similar to what it was, kind of last year. The only difference being kind of potentially 100 million gallon increase, 100 million gallon increase in advanced biofuels for 2018. That would leave kind of the implied conventional biofuel number at 15 billion gallons. I think there's a couple, kind of other pieces that we're, kind of interested in seeing if they're kind of talked about in the proposed rule. One is if there's any verbiage or kind of questions around point of obligation. Our indications are kind of back conversations are maybe not. That may be, kind of looked at for comment someplace else. Then the second, kind of piece leads into the next slide, which is, do they use any kind of level or rationale with regard to the waiver authority and infrastructure? So, on the proposed rule, it'll come out, we'll have like a comment period, we'll be engaged in providing comments from ACE and kind of meeting with OMB and others at the appropriate times, and we'll probably be asking you guys to submit comments as well. From a litigation standpoint, we had the oral arguments in April. I think they, from our perspective and from the attorneys that we retained, they couldn't be happier with kind of the tenor and tone of the questions. really kind of put EPA on their heels with regard to kind of the construction of the waiver language and kind of the circular way by which they got to including infrastructure and kind of blend wool, kind of rationale within the waiver authority. The point from one of the justices was, if this is a problem, why don't you go to Congress and try to fix it? You don't necessarily have the jurisdiction here. And the other piece was, why are you trying to use infrastructure if it's such a big issue? Why don't you go and look at, kind of severe economic harm? And we all know the reason why they didn't look at severe economic harm, because there isn't any. So I think kind of the courts really kind of pushed on that point. Our attorneys felt really good after the, kind of the oral arguments. We're expecting a court decision, kind of potentially being done in July, which will, kind of give an indication for kind of what authority EPA has with regard to that waiver authority that can be, would have to be kind of included in whatever rationale is done for the 2018 RVO. And kind of one of the questions that's outstanding is what do they go back and try to do for the previous years that had reductions based on kind of that rationale. And I think that's an open question to be decided. The other kind of piece that kind of is out there from an House side and Energy and Commerce perspective is Shimkus is kind of continuing to be stuck in this box between Marathon and his corn growers and his kind of ethanol facilities. Marathon has been kind of a significant proponent in trying to look at some level of RFS reform. And Shimkus, I think, to a certain extent, is trying to bleed off a little pressure by having some kind of informal task, kind of forced meetings, kind of on the topic. I think the rationale that he's been using and Marathon's been using, if you kind of look at the next slide and some of the myths that are out there, is, well, 2022 is going to come, and are you really going to leave this in the hands of EPA to kind of set the numbers? And it could, EPA could just decide to kind of completely do away with the schedule, and you'd be better off trying to cut a deal now with, in Congress. I think it's an argument that's pretty loose on the facts, and it's almost to the point of like a scare tactic perspective on trying to kind of force people to the table to undermine kind of where we stand. And I just wanted to kind of highlight 4 bullets here. The first is, the RFS has always had an implied, kind of number for corn ethanol, whether that be in 2007, whether that be today, or that be 2022. I think our goal and some of the work we're doing is to show that corn ethanol is better than sugarcane ethanol in Brazil, kind of other biofuels from a greenhouse gas perspective, and we should be looking at ways to expand it. Kind of moving ahead from a greenhouse gas component. I think the second bullet is the RFS doesn't expire, it doesn't sunset. What it says to EPA is you gotta put volumes, you gotta on a yearly basis set volumes starting in 2023. There's significant kind of requirements on how they have to set those numbers. When we were working on this law in 2007, they adopted majority of the language that the biofuel industry wanted with regard to having to look at, impact on rural America economy, corn prices, and the like. So the factors by which EPA has to look at to set the numbers moving forward are things that if they go below the 2022 numbers or they try to really ratchet down our stuff, will be in violation of kind of the criteria by which they have to judge, and we'd have to go back to, if they did so, we'd have to go back to court and kind of challenge them on that. But I think you could look at where we stand from a congressional standpoint, pushing EPA to do the right thing, and having to back that up in court is by far better than the deal we could cut in Congress today on making any modifications. I think the other kind of piece that we look at is, Congress required them to set minimum volumes for advanced and cellulosic. Cellulosic hasn't obviously come on the way that was kind of called for in 2007. EPA has been kind of significantly ratcheting that down. From the advanced bucket, they've been really relying on, kind of biodiesel and kind of Brazilian sugarcane ethanol as, kind of the ways to fill that bucket. Part of our strategy is to kind of show, kind of the greenhouse gas benefits, as I mentioned above, from corn ethanol, and that we can be better than things that are kind of filling up the advanced bucket, and, if anything, protecting what we have and setting up an argument for, kind of expansion down the road. And you look at kind of those volumes, EPA is going to have to set post 2022, kind of looking at the fall of 2021. So I think as we, kind of look at kind of the overall framework, we have a process, we're looking good with regard to litigation on what waiver authorities in the near term. The EPA for, kind of post 2022, it may be a Trump administration. It may be, a different administration kind of setting those numbers. So we generally feel confident that there's no need to do something legislatively now, because we're in a relatively strong position, both with boxing EPA in and what they have to do, and continuing to protect, kind of efforts to undermine the RFS in Congress. And I think that especially is true as kind of the political intensity from rural America, given kind of the farm economy, intensifies here over the course of the next year or two.
So the RFS point of obligation, Jonathan mentioned it earlier, remains very much on our radar screen. You may recall that back in, I think it was November of 2016, under Obama, EPA proposed to deny petitions from Valero and AFPM and others to move the point of obligation to downstream parties, but they punted sort of the final decision on that to the next administration, and so it falls in the lap, of the Trump EPA to determine that once and for all. We've joined, others in the ethanol industry, retailers, the American Petroleum Institute, believe it or not, and dozens of others, frankly, to strongly send the signal to both Capitol Hill and the White House that we oppose moving the point of obligation. We've made the point this is not going to increase the use of E15 and higher blends of ethanol. It would really serve to reward just a limited class of refiners that have chosen, for far too long not to adapt to the realities of the RFS. Indicated by this illustration, it's pretty easy to see, the point of obligation is currently on the refinery level and the importer level. There are about 150, could be a few more than that, obligated parties that are refiners and importers, and it makes sense for the refinery to be the point of obligation, because after all, they control really the composition of fuel. The Valeros of the world, the Carl Icahns of the world, a few others out there want to move the point of obligation to downstream parties, parties that they sort of label as having a position at the terminal rack. First of all, that's going to dramatically increase the number of obligated parties, and I know there's a little bit of a debate as to how many precisely, but we know for a fact it's far greater than 150. And so that's going to complicate the administration, the oversight of this program for EPA. It will increase taxpayer costs, so EPA could oversee additional obligated parties. It would make compliance with the program, quite a bit more cumbersome and expensive for blenders. If the point of obligation is moved downstream, what we're going to find are these folks that are blenders and marketers are going to be at the mercy of their upstream counterparts, and those are folks that are going to have then enormous market power, enormous market leverage with which to raise the cost of their blend stocks. And the result is going to be higher prices at the pump for customers, and they're going to gravitate away from ethanol blended fuel as a result. And so this is a bad idea, and something that we need to continue to very forcefully oppose as we go forward with the Trump administration, and we intend to do that. Another topic I want to highlight is that this administration has made it no secret that regulatory reform is going to be a big priority of theirs. This was certainly something the president talked about on the campaign trail, and he's really kept his promises with respect to this by having EPA establish a regulatory reform task force. USDA is going to do the same. In fact, Sonny Perdue is going to chair an interagency task force, bringing all of the various cabinet secretaries together to compile a report to the president, I think by sometime in October, making recommendations on what sort of rules and regulations are standing in the way of small businesses and farmers and others. And so we've chosen to engage in this process because we think that the administration is taking this very seriously. This is sort of the laundry list of items that ACE promoted to EPA with respect to their regulatory reform task force. RVP was a major emphasis of our comments, as I noted earlier. We want to get this fixed. If Congress wants to do it first, great, and we're going to strongly support that. If EPA wants to fix it and get it done right, great, we're going to support that. And so we're trying to push all the levers we can. Badly needed is to update the life cycle carbon intensity for corn ethanol. Many of you probably know that Brazil is sort of saber rattling a potential tariff that would be based upon life cycle carbon intensity, and they're using the outdated numbers from our own EPA to sort of argue that corn ethanol isn't good enough from a greenhouse gas standpoint. And so we're really trying to make sure that either EPA uses the DOE data from Argonne or makes the update themselves. We've been supporting many of the things that our friends at the Urban Air Institute are pushing as well. You have the changes needed to make sure that the MOVES model works for higher blends of ethanol. I think the Urban Air Initiative has really uncovered a clever, brilliant legal argument to make to EPA with respect to whether ethanol should be regulated under 211F of the Clean Air Act, which is the substantially similar provision, or provision 211C. And now that E10 is considered a test fuel under the Tier 3 regulations, ethanol is an ingredient in test fuel, and Urban Air has made the case it ought to be regulated through 211C and not sub-sim. When you do that, the onus is on the agency, EPA, to sort of prove that ethanol is guilty. The way the rules are written now, we have to go through so many hoops to prove we're innocent before EPA will allow higher ethanol blends to be used. And so I just tip my hat to Urban Air for what they've uncovered here, and we're trying to be helpful to them in making that argument. We're also trying to see if we can get some of the registration, certification requirements and steps either simplified or taken away so we can pave the way to higher octane, higher ethanol blends, and looking for an opportunity to get some sort of credit back in place for FFEs. Octane. This is obviously one of the very most important priorities we have to work on. If we're going to build demand for ethanol beyond E15, beyond the RFS, it's going to have to be based on the octane value that our product brings to the table. And we have an opportunity to do that under the CAFE greenhouse gas rules. You may recall that under President Obama, they initiated CAFE standards and greenhouse gas emission standards on automakers dating back way to 2012. EPA was supposed to issue a final determination of 2022 to 2025 model year standards in April of next year, but the president rushed to finalize those standards way back in December or January of this year. And so when Trump took office, he ordered EPA to sort of open that process back up. And that was a good thing for us because it gives us an opportunity between now and April of 2018 to make the case with the automakers that we're working with and the agricultural groups and others that a higher octane fuel needs to be part of the solution to meeting these CAFE greenhouse gas standards. A fuel in the range of E25 to E40 delivers enormous benefits when it comes to meeting the goals of this CAFE greenhouse gas program. It gives us an opportunity to push for FFV incentives again. So we've got some time on our hands, and this is a golden opportunity that we're working very hard to take advantage of. Again, the final decision on this will come in April of 2018. We've been working very closely with automakers, with agricultural groups, with the other ethanol groups, with the corn growers for a number of years now to sort of build the technical case for why a higher octane fuel makes a lot of sense to be a tool that automakers can use to meet CAFE greenhouse gas. Automakers are telling us they'd like something in the range of a 99, probably a 100 research octane fuel. There are certainly a variety of ways you can get there, but one of the best ways to get there is a blend somewhere between E25 and E30. A lot of progress is being made from the technical standpoint, sort of behind the scenes. An ASTM specification for high-octane fuel was approved last year. I think this year you'll see some work within ASTM to perfect that, to improve upon that specification, which is really important for us in the future. Oak Ridge National Lab and the automakers individually have done a lot of research on the technical benefits, the fuel efficiency benefits of an E25 or an E30 blend. And so building that case, the scientific case for it, Wayne and Gilbarco pumps are being tested for higher ethanol blends. You certainly have Wayne moving to produce everything that they have from a fuel dispenser standpoint to be E25 compatible from a UL listing standpoint. And so work is being done, important accomplishments are occurring. The ultimate goal we have between now and April of 2018 then is to convince automakers to petition EPA for a test fuel, for a certification fuel that's somewhere in the range of, you know, a 99 or 100 RON research octane number, somewhere in that E25 to E30 range. And so that's important work that we will continue over the course of the year. I want to pivot a bit to trade. You all know that when oil companies and EPA put artificial barriers in place of using more ethanol here at home, as an industry, we've had to find other markets for our fuel, and there's been tremendous interest, tremendous demand for ethanol abroad because of the economic value of our product, because of the clean octane value of our product. You know, we exported north of 1 billion gallons to more than 50 countries last year. If you look at the first quarter of 2017, ethanol exports anyway, they were on pace to exceed what we saw in 2017. Similarly, exports of distillers grains have been always an important part of the bottom line, an important part of the equation. And so as this administration tackles trade reform, we need to be engaged with them. Robert Lighthizer was just confirmed recently by the Senate to be the United States trade rep for the administration. One of his first jobs will be to undertake NAFTA renegotiation. If you're a corn farmer, I don't need to tell you that Mexico is one of the top markets for corn. Mexico also happens to be a really important market for distillers grain and an important evolving marketplace for ethanol. And so Mexico will be engaged in this process and has expressed interest in renegotiating NAFTA, and similarly Canada has as well. Sonny Perdue, the Ag Secretary, in fact, I think was in Canada just yesterday, meeting with his counterpart and laying the groundwork. And so We will be engaged with the administration and monitoring this, certainly with an eye toward how this impacts ethanol and distillers. And as we've seen the export market become more and more important to our industry, we've also unfortunately seen some unfair trade barriers get erected. And there's the saber rattling in Brazil about a new tariff. We certainly have seen Peru start to investigate exports of ethanol into their country. And of course you have China with the additional ethanol tariff that they imposed earlier this year, and then the countervailing and anti-dumping levies that they have. Jonathan mentioned at the outset Terry Branstad, who was confirmed by the Senate to be the ambassador to China. We're certainly hoping and working with him to ensure that his ties to Beijing, to the president of China, will help us address some of these trade barriers that have been erected there. So now I want to pivot a little bit, switch gears, and just briefly highlight the conference coming up. It'll be in Omaha, August 15th, 16th, and 17th. Registration is open, so you can go to our website, ethanol.org, and see the agenda and register for the event. Shannon indicates to me that oftentimes Omaha is the location where we see the strongest attendance, and so we hope that's the case again. And if you're sitting back thinking, well, maybe I'll go, but I'm not sure, hopefully you will come, because you're likely to see some of the folks in the industry that you want to. I should note it's our 30th anniversary, and so we're highlighting that this year. The motto or the theme for the conference is tested, proven, and driven. We've got a number of folks that we've invited to the conference that I think you'll enjoy. Senator Fisher of Nebraska, who is one of the leading members of Congress behind this RVP legislation that Jonathan and I had talked about earlier, has been invited. We will be presenting her with an award for her work on RVP, so hopefully you can be there for that. Governor Ricketts of Nebraska has been very engaged on some of our priorities, has good relationship with the Trump administration, has been making some calls and doing some meetings on behalf of the ethanol industry priorities with the administration, so he will be addressing us to sort of talk about some of the progress there. And we've also invited the Trade Representative's Office and the EPA, the new EPA Administrator's Office, to be present to highlight some of the things going on with the administration. We've got a number of topics that I think will be of interest to you. Jonathan mentioned earlier tax reform. The idea is plan now for how you can make some money and be competitive given what you might see coming down the pike for tax reform. We have Donna Funk with Keiko Isom that will talk about that. From a retail standpoint, instead of ethanol's point of obligation, we're doing a panel on ethanol's point of opportunity. We'll have a retailer from the Milwaukee area who is selling E15 come talk about some things that he's doing, and then a marketer from Nebraska talk about the move to higher blends that their company has made. We'll do, I think, a good panel on high-octane fuel. We have someone from Wayne who will come talk about the move that they made to produce pumps that are listed for E25. We'll have Brian West of Oak Ridge National Laboratory talking about some of the auto engine testing that's being done on higher ethanol, higher octane blends. And then we're going to have Adam Gustafson with Boyd & Gray and Associates talk about some of the regulatory pathways that we're navigating to try and get a higher octane, higher ethanol blend approved. Jim Galvin with Lakeview Energy Partners is going to be with us to talk about what's going on from a trade perspective, from a global perspective. And then Christy Moore will talk with us about some of the technical issues that are going on behind the scenes, whether it's ASTM or some work she's doing in Mexico to set the stage for greater ethanol use there. So hopefully these topics are of interest to you. Once again, we'll have a lot of breakout sessions and certainly a track dedicated specifically for boards of directors. We have a lot of topics that we will cover for boards of directors. We're also going to highlight some ways that ethanol producers have been active in helping retailers do maybe a ribbon cutting for E15 or E30, and what's worked well, what hasn't, to give you some tips for if you want to do something like that in your area, how you can help, and then some work on how we're directly trying to, or working with ethanol producers, I should say, to directly market ethanol to see more higher blends used. And so we'll cover some of those topics in the breakouts. We do have sponsorships available. I want to thank so many of you, certainly the corn growers and many others who have stepped up to the plate already to sponsor. I think you'll find that the ACE conference is a pretty darn good value. If you have limited sponsorship dollars, it's a pretty cost-effective way to get in front of some of the decision makers of the industry. And so we hope you'll give our conference a look in terms of sponsorships. Please contact Chuck in our office, and you see his email address and phone number there. Chuck would be delighted to work with you on sponsorships. And as I indicated, registration is open at our website, ethanol.org. We'll be at the DoubleTree Hotel downtown Omaha, and we hope we can see many of you there. So that's everything we wanted to cover. I think at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Shannon, or I don't know, maybe both of us will do this, but we'll certainly entertain questions if you do have any. So now is your opportunity. Remember to please type your questions, and then Shannon will kind of moderate those for us. Shannon, do we have any questions?
I do not see any yet.
Well, if we don't have any questions, we can certainly let people go. It looks like we've taken up a full hour. So Shannon, I guess I'll say one more time, or ask one more time, are there any other questions? Or are there any questions? All right, I'm going to take that as a no. So we're going to stop, and thank you very much for joining us.